bosses in London have admitted they are... London ambulance unions are meeting now to discuss calling a national strike ballot. Crews in other parts of the country are already on unofficial strike. Their national union negotiators are at the meeting to try to talk them out of calling for a ballot. Shop stewards going into the meeting are split on how to escalate the action. The Health Secretary Kenneth Clarke has hinted that there may be scope for better pay deals in the future if they're negotiated locally between ambulance crews and area health authorities. But he's repeated there is no extra money to fund the union's current demands in the dispute.
The chief union negotiator, Roger Poole, was today facing his toughest challenge yet in this 20-week dispute to persuade shop stewards in North London to abandon calls for a ballot on an all-out national strike.
Overwhelmingly, our members are saying they don't want a national strike ballot. They agree with the strategy we've got. They're standing behind the strategy, and I'm sure our members in London will do that. They're decent people.
Do you see this as a direct challenge to your leadership?
No, of course it's not.
Some stewards believe strike action is the only way forward.
We don't want to take strike action, but we need some more tools at our disposal to actually move management. They seem so entrenched, so we've got to do something, and I think the national strike ballot's the way out.
But the membership are clearly split, many showing strong support for Mr Poole's leadership.
Very good man, calm, hell of a lot better than Kenneth Clarke, isn't he? He doesn't lose his temper. Got to give it to the man, he's very, very good.
Despite that vote of confidence, concern is growing as to what more the leadership can offer if ministers refuse to reopen talks. In Manchester today, officials were carrying out their own opinion poll to test support for strike action. In Essex, staff have decided to continue their unofficial strike, leaving the county almost entirely reliant on the army and police. Doctors say they're now alarmed at the prospect of any further disruption to patients.
Obviously, the loss of the limited ambulance service that we do currently have would only serve to increase that distress and suffering and the potential risk to life.
The signs are that union leaders have persuaded the stewards here to abandon the idea of a national strike. But around the country, more ambulance workers are voting with their feet. And if the number of unofficial strikes grows, it could seriously undermine the union's national strategy. Libby Vina, ITN at Transport House.
Leaders representing London's 2,000 ambulance workers have decided not to call for a strike over their pay dispute. They said they were totally united behind their chief negotiator, Roger Poole. He told the meeting, "We won't crack, we won't be provoked into a strike." But elsewhere, action's being stepped up.
The chief union negotiator, Roger Poole, had always insisted his members would never strike. Today, backed by other union leaders, he convinced shop stewards in London to fall into line. They emerged not only united against strike action, but even in talking to the press.
We're all united, see Roger Poole.
We're standing united.
The vote was decisive, 57 to 12 against a strike ballot.
Today is a message to the government that we will not crack. There are no splits in this dispute. There are no splits between the leadership and the membership. There are no splits between members. There is unity.
Most shop stewards were confident they could win over their members.
There is no deal, there's no deal. Here's the people on the shop floor saying we don't want a strike ballot. That's it.
But crews at 3 London stations, including Tottenham, are tonight still on unofficial strike.
I think the feeling of the station is that we are disappointed. We were hoping that the dispute would come to an end very quickly, but obviously not.
Today's vote is a significant victory for the union leadership. But unless the government now gives some ground, the frustration which has already provoked a number of unofficial strikes is bound to grow. Libby Vina, ITN at Transport House.
Is what's going to win this dispute. But more importantly, the London ambulance crews have got such a bond now between them and the public. Because the public have supported us so overwhelmingly since this dispute began, is that we feel that we cannot turn our backs on them people.
Chief union negotiator Roger Poole urged all striking ambulance crews to call off their action.
The sense of discipline and unity in the London ambulance service is very, very high indeed. And I have every confidence now that every single ambulance man and woman in London, regardless of what their personal opinions are, will stand behind that decision.
So, a persuasive Roger Poole has won the day, and by all accounts it didn't need that much persuasion. But there's no doubt the longer this dispute goes on, there'll be more calls for an intensification of the action. And even as the meeting was going on, the dispute in Essex was escalating, with most ambulance crews not answering any calls. They're angry at management withdrawing insurance cover. Anyone injured whilst answering a call, such as these two ambulancemen from Brentwood, whose vehicle was in a crash, will not receive compensation.
The 19 ambulancemen here at Tottenham, and they've decided to stay on strike until they have a meeting on Thursday. They'll revise their decision then. Chris Lambert, why have you decided to stay out until Thursday?
Well, we've seen the results of the ballot from the stewards today, and as it's a complex vote, we think it's only fair that we should have a complex meeting. We got a statement. In view of the outcome of today's meeting, we will be holding a complex meeting on Thursday morning to review our present position.
Are you worried that you'll be out on a limb until Thursday and different from everyone else?
Well, we will be out on a limb, but it's only fair that we have a democratic vote to decide what we're going to do next as a democratic decision to strike.
How strong are the feelings here? Do you think your people feel more strongly than at other ambulance stations?
Our people feel very strongly. I cannot make a statement on other ambulance stations because I haven't had a feedback from them.
Now, is it 100% strike, or in certain circumstances are you prepared to go out?
No, we're prepared to go out. To any member of the public who comes to the station. The other night we went out in a private car to deal with a young child, hydrocephalus patient, who had fluid build up on the brain.
And you were able perhaps to save him, weren't you?
Well, yes, because the father dialed 999 and they were told they could not get an ambulance for at least 45 minutes or maybe longer. And when we went round, the child was unconscious.
So you actually took him to hospital?
Yes.
And you will continue to do that although you're on strike?
Yes, most definitely.
OK, so from here at Tottenham, where they're going to be on strike until Thursday, back to the studio.
Overwhelming decision, wasn't it, by London's ambulance staff not to take strike action, to maintain their pledge to the people of London, to keep accident emergency services going. And I think that was a very, very good decision.
Many of the shop stewards came to that meeting with a mandate to push for a strike ballot. There is apparently going to be a mass meeting and a vote on Thursday amongst crews about whether they wish to take unofficial action. What would you say to them?
Well, no, the vast majority of the stewards that came along there came along with a mandate not to take strike action. You see, they'd already discussed these matters with their members on the ambulance stations, and their members had said to them that they do not wish to take strike action in this dispute. They want to keep maintaining emergency services as they've done for 20 weeks. And they voted that way, quite overwhelmingly, to reject a strike throughout this dispute.
Do you think that that decision will be respected by all crews throughout London?
Oh, I'm sure that it will. I mean, the thing about London is that staff have always been very united. They've always done the same thing as everybody else, and I'm sure that the staff in the London Ambulance Service will respect the democratic decision of London stewards today, a decision taken after consultation with the members not to have a strike in London.
What's your response to the action by crews outside London? In Essex last night, they voted to step up their action there. There are still crews who are on strike in Sussex.
Yes, but I understand that in all of those places, people are maintaining themselves on their stations to answer the most serious calls. So this isn't a strike as such. What it is a degree of frustration and anger there. But what we're saying to all of our members throughout the country, whatever they do, they must maintain basic accident and emergency services, because that's the pledge that we gave to the people of this country at the start of this dispute, and we're going to keep to that pledge. You see, it's the government who have removed accident and emergency services when they've dragged our members through the courts, as they did in Oxford, to stop them using their vehicles on mercy missions, when they have taken keys away from vehicles and equipment away from vehicles. And the government have now got to understand that their strategy of trying to provoke a strike in the ambulance service to try and turn public opinion against Britain's ambulance crews won't work.
But do you
these
think
people
that
will not do that.
Do you think that you have taken the issue of an all-out strike off the agenda, or have you merely postponed what some would see as the inevitable?
Oh no, I think the issue is now off the agenda. We shall have a meeting of the trade union side on Thursday, and we shall report to the trade union side that the overwhelming majority of our members throughout the country do not want a strike.
Strongly condemned crews taking unofficial action. The chief union negotiator, Roger Poole, said after a 4-hour meeting in London there will not be any strike and there will be accident and emergency cover. And he said union officers would be sent to meet ambulance crews in northwest London who walked out this morning.
Crews at Camden and 2 other ambulance stations in northwest London went on unofficial strike this morning, ignoring a decisive vote by London shop stewards 2 days ago against strike action.
Because there's a mood among the ordinary union members that's bubbling. There's something has got to be done. The passive way we've been going about it hasn't worked.
The move, directly defying union instructions and threatening to undermine the authority of union leaders, provoked a furious response from Roger Poole, the chief negotiator.
We condemn that decision. It is our view that nobody in the ambulance service should take strike action in this dispute. We are not prepared to support strike action in this dispute, and we have a very simple message for those of our members who have taken strike action in London today, and that is to stop those strikes and to continue to provide the accident and emergency services that the overwhelming majority of London's ambulance staff have provided throughout this dispute.
Mr. Poole's statement is the strongest indication yet that union leaders are not prepared to accept unofficial action by their members. It's also a calculated gamble designed to bring rebel crews into line. If it fails, it could encourage more strike action. But if it succeeds, Mr. Poole will have managed once again to achieve the united front he wants to bring Mr. Clark to the negotiating table.
All-out strike today, leaving the city without emergency cover for the first time. The strike is in defiance of their own union leaders. As the dispute nears its 5th month, ITN's Channel 4 News tonight gave the Health Secretary, Mr. Kenneth Clark, and the Chief Union Negotiator, Mr. Roger Poole, the chance to present their own television reports on the dispute.
This was a rare meeting for the two main protagonists in the ambulance dispute, deciding on the toss of a coin who should have the last word on tonight's Channel 4 News. For his film, the Health Secretary, Mr. Clark, went up to Northumbria, which he sees as a model for the future.
I'm in a new helicopter that's just about to come into service with the Northumbria Ambulance Service.
They can afford it, he says, because routine work is mostly privatised, leaving ambulance crews to concentrate on emergencies only. Out with a paramedic team, Mr. Clark saw their skills at first hand. He watched as they tried to revive a man who later died. He's anxious to show his concern.
I am no different from anybody else in having the greatest respect for these crews.
But he's not deflected from his main message.
One reason why we can't pay the ambulancemen just what they want is we do have to spend a lot of money on the patients. This is £30 million worth of new block, and I'm standing where the ambulances will drive in.
His own chief executive tells him the answer is local productivity deals.
We think we've got a fair offer on the table.
More patients will have to travel to hospital by bus, and the ones he interviews seem to like it.
Well, do you prefer it, or do you miss the old ambulance?
I'd rather have this.
Sorry?
I'd rather have this.
You'd rather have this? Now, do you agree with that?
Yes.
You'd rather have this?
This is precisely where the unions disagree. All ambulance crews do an invaluable job, according to their leader, Roger Poole, and all should be rewarded.
This is Britain's ambulance service today. This dispute is about pay, status and training. And on all of those issues, we have a fundamental disagreement with the government.
The patients he interviews want to keep their ambulance service.
What do you think about Mr. Clark calling them professional drivers?
I think it's dreadful.
Unlike Mr. Clark, Mr. Poole also spoke to the crews.
What does each of you earn?
£10,093.
Just over 10,800.
£7,340.
He insists they are an emergency service, just like the fire and police.
They save people's lives. Why should they be paid less than their colleagues in the fire and the police service with whom they work on all of these occasions?
But even in this dispute, there have been lighter moments, like Mr. Poole demonstrating his tactical skills at a fundraising football match. The point, though, was serious. Many of the ambulancemen had been at the Hillsborough disaster. He says that accounts for the public support demonstrated in rallies around the country this month. Despite their amicable meeting today, 20 weeks into the dispute, Mr. Poole and the Health Secretary are still a long way from the negotiating table.
Crews. Their chief negotiator, Roger Poole, hailed the protest as a massive show of people power. But the Health Secretary, Kenneth Clark, dismissed it as pointless and said a lot of ambulance work could be passed to people who could do it better. At the stroke of 12, ambulance crews across the country today put people power to the test. Thousands joined rallies with the biggest turnout in the northwest and in Scotland. In Glasgow, where ambulance crews began an unofficial strike today, some 30,000 marched through the city centre. It was one of the largest demonstrations of the 20-week dispute. Elsewhere, balloons marked the start of the 15-minute stoppage, seen as a key test of the union leadership's strategy.
In London, a piper accompanied the chief union negotiator, Roger Poole, as he confidently predicted the unions could still win the dispute.
This is a massive show of people power. That is what we asked for, and that is what the people have given us. There is only one message to the government. You have lost this dispute.
But the response on the shop floor was more mixed. In Bristol, 2,000 Rolls-Royce workers walked out, and in Northern Ireland, workers attended a mass rally outside the Harland and Wolff shipyard. Some white-collar staff also joined the stoppage, among them a firm of solicitors who walked out of their offices in central Manchester. In Birmingham, the city's symphony orchestra joined the chorus of protests, abandoning their rehearsals to perform at a lunchtime rally. Even at the Department of Health in Whitehall, a handful of officials left their desks. But in the midst of the protests, a reminder of what's at stake in this dispute, a 999 service reduced to virtual chaos in many parts of the country. Libby Vina, ITN, Central London.
At Westminster, drivers showed their support for the ambulance officers with a demonstration of noise. Labour MPs stopped work and joined strikers outside the Commons. In the chamber, it was the Democrat spokesman who kicked off the attack on Mrs Thatcher, taken up by the Labour leader.
And when the public so clearly supports the ambulance workers' case, why is the Prime Minister so completely out of touch with the feelings of the British people?
One Labour MP wanted to know who the Prime Minister would turn to in an accident.
If she were to fall under a bus tomorrow, who would she... And it would have to be a brave one. Who would she call for? Booper or an ambulanceman?
The ambulancemen had an offer, according to where they work and their qualifications, of an increase in pay varying from 9% to 16.3%. Many of them are still maintaining their accident and emergency service, and we honour them for it.
Labour's health spokesman Robin Cook tried to introduce a bill on ambulance pay. No one from the government bothered to speak, confident of their majority. Kim Catcherside, ITN, Westminster.
In central London, hundreds of students and council workers marched to show their support. There were other rallies and marches all over the capital, with union leaders joining factory workers south of the river to show solidarity with ambulance crews. Elsewhere, the focus was on fundraising. In Birmingham, 10,000 white noses were sold, and part of the city's orchestra played to show their support. There was music too in Cardiff, where singers joined hundreds of workers taking part in a rally in the city centre. In Manchester, Albert Square was filled by council workers and students who joined ambulance crews to urge the government to settle the dispute. In Leeds, a march and rally in the city centre brought home the message that after nearly 5 months, ambulance crews aren't prepared to give up. In the south, the rector of St Michael's Church in Basingstoke invited local ambulance workers to pray for what he called a just solution to the dispute. But despite well-attended demonstrations of support, there was little real disruption around the country. And there's no sign that the action has caused any political change of heart by the Health Secretary, Kenneth Clarke.
Dispute, and the ambulance staff are right. That is what the British people are saying. Now, in a democracy, the government must listen to the people. If they don't, then their democratic credentials are very seriously at risk. Now, I think as a result of this stunning display, and that's what it is, of the people's opinion in this dispute, Mr. Clarke should listen to them, and then he should sit down and talk to us.
More demonstrations are planned over the next few weeks. But unless they succeed in influencing political opinion, union leaders may again find themselves under pressure to adopt a different strategy, even though it's clear from today's action that public support is firmly behind the ambulance crews.
In the Commons, Mrs Thatcher rejected a charge that she'd been doggedly inflexible towards the ambulancemen. She said the latest offer was worth an extra £6 million and would give the ambulance workers pay rises of between 9 and 16%. The Labour leader Neil Kinnock said the Prime Minister was completely out of touch with public opinion and had spent £10 million keeping the dispute going.
Capital City and Bread added their support to the TUC campaign.
one of the government's big arguments against their getting more money is everyone else will want more money in the National Health Service. The ancillary workers, the nurses and the junior doctors. And the answer is, yes, they will want more, and yes, they bloody well should get more, because there should be a lot more money poured into the National Health Service.
The time has come. 2,000 workers attended a mass rally at Nine Elms addressed by the union negotiators leader Roger Poole.
There is only one message to the government. You have lost this dispute. Accept that you have lost it. Get around a negotiating table and bring the dispute to an end. That's what the people want. And that's what our government in a democracy have got to do.
As one of the shortest industrial protests ever came to an end, it was clear that millions of Londoners didn't take part in the action, but those who did, like the drivers who sounded their horns around Parliament Square, made sure their message was heard. Ken Andrew, Thames News.
And we're joined now by the chief union negotiator for the ambulance worker, Roger Poole. Good evening to you, Mr. Poole. Good evening. There have certainly been some demonstrations of support, but London has hardly ground to a halt today. A great many people have simply ignored the call.
Well, it was never our intention that London or anywhere else should grind to a halt. We asked the public to make their protests. They've made it in lots of different ways. Some people have joined demonstrations. Others have held collections in their factories for the ambulance fund. It has been a stunning success today. The people have had their voice heard, and they've made their view very, very clear to the government.
But in that report we've just seen, we heard you saying the government has lost. Don't you think there's a danger that perhaps you are just beginning to lose the support of the general public?
No, not at all. I think quite the reverse. Public support, if anything, is growing. And there's no doubt about it, the government have lost the argument. The argument was lost a long time ago by the government. 6.5% is a ridiculous offer to Britain's ambulance crews, and the government ought now to sit down with reasonable trade unions and put together a reasonable settlement with a formula for the future so that we never again see an industrial dispute like this in Britain's ambulance service.
You say 6.3%. I don't want to get into too many figures, but this afternoon in the Commons I heard the Prime Minister saying between 9% and 16.3%, which in this financial year will be something like about £6 million. Now, after 21 weeks, isn't it time that you moved a little with that offer on the table?
Well, we have moved. We've said that we will accept less than our claim. We've said that if they don't like the firefighters' pay formula, we'll look at another type of pay formula. Our problem is that the government will not meet us and discuss the dispute with us. Now, one has to ask the question of them as to why that is.
But Mr. Clark says he is prepared to meet you at any time.
Well, why doesn't he agree to a meeting? We've been asking him for a meeting now ever since Christmas, and he has refused to meet us. He's refused to allow his negotiators to meet us. I believe the reason is that they don't have a negotiating strategy to deal with the dispute. We do. And they know that, and they know that once they get around that bargaining table, that the only people who've got a negotiating strategy to end the dispute are ourselves. Now, if that's the case, let's get around the table, and let's say to the government what we've got to say to them. Let them say to us what they want to say to us. Let's bring this dispute to an end. That's what the public are saying, but it has to be brought to an end in a reasonable manner for Britain's ambulance crews.
Well, let's hope that's not too long. Mr. Poole, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
It would be over before facing the embarrassment of the top salaries review. Holding the line at 6.5% for ambulance workers gets harder, as doctors and nurses today got 9% and over. Review boards are always more generous than the weekly councils, which fix most NHS pay. That's why the ambulance workers want a review board too. It's also why Kenneth Clark won't give them one. Today, chief ambulance officers produced a new secret peace plan to put to the NHS management. It's thought to recommend local flexible pay deals for ambulance crews, an idea Kenneth Clark has floated before, but the unions hold firm to a national pay bargaining structure. However, if national pay guidelines were linked to regional deals, then an agreement might be struck.
As I understand it, what the chief ambulance officers in Harrogate have said is that they want to go and see Mr. Nicholl and put before him some proposals for ending the dispute. Now, we would be very interested in meeting Mr. Nicholl after the chief ambulance officers have met them and discussing those proposals with them.
But the ambulance workers are only a tiny part of the NHS pay crisis. The Treasury estimated inflation for next year at only 5.3%, an unlikely target. Every percentage point over that level comes straight out of NHS money for improvements. With doctors and nurses settling at 9%, it'll be impossible to hold other NHS pay rises at below inflation levels. The extra money Kenneth Clark squeezed out of the Treasury now risks being swallowed up into higher than budgeted pay settlements.
Calls for a local pay deal after union leaders warned it would undermine efforts to reach a national agreement. 12 Yorkshire ambulance workers arrived in the capital today after a 200-mile protest march from Barnsley. They laid a wreath at the scene of the King's Cross disaster.
Stewards arrived for the meeting saying it was now time to call for a separate pay deal for London, even if it meant abandoning their colleagues elsewhere.
I'm all in favour of that. Yeah, I'm all in favour of that.
Why?
Well, because I believe that London is a special case. We have higher costs of housing. We have higher costs all around. I believe we're a busier service. I just personally believe we deserve a better deal.
But after nearly 3 hours, the vote was a decisive 45-17 against a call for a local settlement.
It was certainly discussed. It was discussed at some length. But we feel that that's not the way that this dispute should be finished.
Roger Poole, the union's chief negotiator, said the stewards were still united.
I didn't need to do any persuading at all. The London shop stewards had decided that this is a national dispute. All of their colleagues up and down the country involved in it, and the London membership are not going to do a local deal. Make no mistake about that, and I didn't have to persuade them about it.
But despite Mr Poole's confidence, many stewards said privately they were concerned about the apparent failure of public opinion to help win the dispute. Tomorrow, national union officials are meeting to discuss future tactics. The key test will come next week, when shop stewards from all over Britain meet to decide their next move. Some now believe it's time to ask crews if they want to continue their action or go back to work.
Stewards from all over London met here at Transport House today. The main item on the agenda was whether they should try to negotiate for a local pay deal. Emergency crews in the capital, who've been suspended without pay for nearly 5 months now, are feeling increasingly isolated. But Chief Union negotiator Roger Poole advised against a local pay settlement. He said the only way to win this dispute was with a united front. Eventually, the shop stewards voted 45-17 against a local pay deal.
And a number of people today, not many, but a number of people today, felt that that might be the way out of the dispute. But as I say, it was totally rejected, and it's not the way that London will go.
So what is the way out of the dispute, do you know?
The way out of the dispute is for the rest of the country, those services that are currently on pay, taking instructions from their control and managers to stop doing that. That's the way that this dispute can be won.
Crews from Barnsley in Yorkshire, who are also suspended, walked nearly 200 miles to deliver a letter to the Health Secretary Kenneth Clarke at the Commons today. They also wanted to show their solidarity with colleagues in London.
We've come down here just to pass a message on to Mr Clarke and to show the other people that throughout the country that we're all in this together. There's not just London and South Yorkshire, it's everybody throughout the country.
Leaders of the 5 ambulance unions and 40 local shop stewards meet tomorrow to review the dispute. Sharon Doughty for Thames News.
Step up action over their deadlocked pay dispute by refusing to take orders from management. That's expected to bring more suspensions nationwide and put further strain on the 999 service.
Many of the 200 shop stewards arriving at today's meeting wanted the leadership to call an all-out strike. They resisted that, but instead said crews in all areas should now refuse to cooperate with management, a move that would mean them being suspended.
They won't talk to their chief ambulance officers, they won't take instructions from their chief ambulance officers, they will have nothing more to do with the management of the ambulance service. They will, in effect, take the running of the ambulance service into their own hands.
Earlier, the chief executive of the NHS again ruled out any settlement based on a pay formula.
The problem in relation to settling the dispute is still this question of are the unions hung up on a formula or a formula by another name, or have they not come off that?
The unions are clear that remains a central demand. However much the unions may protest that this isn't a strike, it's likely that more police and troops will now have to be brought in, leaving them in virtual control of the country's 999 service. Libby Vina, ITN at Transport House.
Majority in favour of indefinite strike action. They'll meet later this week to decide on their next move. The vote is in defiance of national union policy, but the chief negotiator Roger Poole said he was still confident that the Merseyside crews would continue to provide emergency cover.
The counting began at 11 o'clock after shop stewards from Merseyside's 22 ambulance stations arrived with ballot papers representing the feelings of 500 ambulance staff in the region. An hour later, the result was announced.
The votes for indefinite strike action are 223 and the votes against are 157.
Ambulance crews from across the region will decide at a meeting on Thursday just how to put today's decision into action. But there were mixed feelings among shop stewards after the vote.
I'm not happy with the decision, but then again, those people who voted in favour of strike action are not going to be happy. This really is the last card we've got to play.
Mr. Poole
ought to listen to us now. We've listened to him for 23 weeks, and we've got nowhere.
Even before today's vote, emergency cover in the region has been increasingly stretched, with a third of the crews now off pay and police and managers handling much of the work. Merseyside's chief ambulance officer says he could be forced to call in the army within a week if there's a total stoppage.
I'm strictly on the side of patience in this dispute, and it really does concern me that we're having to deploy vehicles and people who are not really suitable for the job that has to be done.
The vote, even with its narrow majority, is bound to embarrass Mr. Poole. He's made it clear on several occasions that he won't officially endorse strike action by his members. So this latest move once again raises questions about just how firmly he's in control of the dispute, at a time when ambulance crews all over Britain have been asked to step up their action by refusing to accept orders from their chief ambulance officers. This morning, police in South Glamorgan took over the running of the 999 service for the first time in Wales, after a temporary High Court injunction came into force, preventing ambulance crews setting up an alternative service after they refused to accept orders from senior managers. Despite their determination to continue their action indefinitely, the growing frustration among crews may now force both sides in the dispute to reopen negotiations to reach a settlement.
At a breakthrough in the ambulance dispute. He told the Commons that today's talks at the Conciliation Service ACAS marked the dawning of a new common sense. Union leaders also described the talks as a significant development.
Union leaders arrived for today's talks, noticeably reticent about the prospects for peace. But after informal contacts yesterday, the two sides have for the first time found a basis for serious negotiations.
ACAS have called us, so we're quite happy to be here and see what they've got to say to us.
Is there going to be a compromise on the pay formula?
Well, I'll be in a lot better position to tell you about how confident we are when we come out of the meeting some stage later on, but we'll see what we can do.
NHS Chief Executive Duncan Nicol was giving even less away as he went into ACAS, but in the Commons, the Health Secretary, Mr Clark, was unusually optimistic.
The government and the management have made it quite clear that we're anxious to see talks resume, and the basis upon which talks could be resumed has been made quite clear for some weeks. And I'm glad that common sense has now dawned and talks have been resumed on that basis.
It's clear that the two sides will now be looking for a two-year deal. The main question is whether a compromise can be reached on the question of a pay formula for ambulance crews.
And as you join us live, the two sides are still locked in talks. There has been a suggestion that they might adjourn soon and resume negotiations in the full Whitley Council. That's the NHS pay negotiating body. If so, it's the most hopeful sign yet that an end could be in sight to this dispute. Libby Vina, ITN at ACAS.
And the ambulance unions are still going on. We're joined now from outside the ACAS offices in London by our health correspondent, Sarah Barclay. Sarah, in your judgment, are we in the final stages of this dispute?
I think it's too early to be absolutely certain about that, but there is certainly room for optimism. A union spokeswoman has just emerged a few moments ago and said that wide-ranging discussions were now taking place and that could only be a good thing. Both sides are now beginning their third session of face-to-face talks since they've been meeting here this afternoon, and we understand that they are actually thrashing out quite a lot of detail, which could well mean that there is some sort of settlement in the offing.
Are the signs that they'll go for an all-night blockbuster or pack it in for the night and start again tomorrow?
The unions say they're prepared to talk all night if necessary. They are very clear that they want the discussions to finish. But it's also important to say that whatever they decide here then has to go to the Whitley Council, which is the health service pay negotiating body, to be discussed, and it then has to go to a ballot of the ambulance members who have to accept any deal.
Who needs a settlement most? Do you get the impression that there is a lot of urgency on both sides?
I think there's pressure on both sides, yes, to reach a settlement. On the government side, there are local elections in May, and there's a by-election coming up in Staffordshire. And on the union side, there is still demands across in various parts of the country for strike action. There's a lot of frustration and dissatisfaction amongst crews who desperately need a settlement. And in some parts of the country, they're also getting very short of money after 6 months of industrial action.
Sarah Barclay at ACAS, thank you very much.
Two-year deal, but reactions to any proposed settlement will vary. Of the 46 areas, crews in 28 ambulance services have been suspended since November. In 20 of those, the police and army have been called in. But in 18 areas, 999 crews are still being paid and will clearly want a substantially improved offer.
Management had always insisted that the unions drop their demands for a pay formula, and tonight they appeared confident of progress.
There's no details. We make good progress. There are no details of the package.
Have the unions dropped their demands for a pay formula?
No details. We meet on Thursday, the full Whitley Council, and that's all we're saying.
But the unions too appeared to believe they had won concessions. A figure of 16% is thought likely.
We always said that negotiations were the only way to end this dispute. We're pleased that those negotiations have now started. We had a useful, constructive discussion here today, and those discussions are going to continue again on Thursday, full meeting of the Ambulance Council.
Is it 16%?
We've got no further comment to make.
Ambulance crews who'd lobbied the meeting were more sceptical.
We've come to the end of our tether. We want a fair deal like the police and the fire brigade have got, and if we don't get it, then we're going to have to carry on until we do get it. Otherwise, you are not going to have an ambulance service throughout this country.
But we were not reassured by the press statements being put out by ACAS. We do feel that there may be the possibility of a sellout.
The unions tonight would only say that the negotiations had reached an extremely delicate stage. It seems likely there have been concessions on the pay formula, but they know without any form of linkage, the deal would almost certainly be rejected by the membership. Libby Vena, News at 10 at ACAS.
The eve of crucial peace talks aimed at settling the 23-week-old dispute. She's been questioned over allegations of assault and criminal damage during a demonstration last month at the London Ambulance headquarters in Waterloo. The woman has been released on police bail. Warrants have been issued for the arrests of 3 others. Union leaders say the timing of the police action couldn't have been worse.
Yes, I mean, I've had a couple of calls already, and it's pretty clear there's a number of witnesses coming forward. I mean,
news of Susan Hearn's arrest this morning came as a complete shock to union officials and ambulance staff alike. Officers took her to Lavender Hill Station for questioning at 7:20 this morning. She's been arrested in connection with allegations of assault on vehicles and criminal damage during this demonstration at London Ambulance headquarters at Waterloo last month. Police have now released her on bail, but have also issued warrants for the arrest of 3 other crew members. On the eve of the peace talks, union officials say the action is clearly provocative.
It does seem perhaps that the police have overreacted. I mean, certainly we're clear that none of our members should have had anything to fear from what we've heard this morning from a mass of individuals. I think there's a mass of witnesses to those particular alleged incidents, and we're clear in our minds that our members have nothing to fear.
The unions are also angry at letters that are being sent out to London crews threatening them with dismissal for not calling in at the start of their shift. Meanwhile, preparations are being made for tomorrow's peace talks at the Whitley Council. Both sides in the dispute will finalise proposals for a pay deal made at ACAS yesterday. In the last 6 months, crews have rejected the government's offers of 6.5% and 9% over 18 months. Details of the new proposals have not yet been released, but informed sources believe an improved pay offer of 16 or 17% over 2 years is on the table, although they fear a pay formula is not part of the deal.
If that's what it is, with no pay formula, then that's not what we stood out here for 4 months for.
Been out for 23 weeks now, fighting for a pay formula so we don't have to do this type of action anymore. And if we don't get it, then probably we've been sold down the river.
But crews fear the deal will be accepted because they're desperate to bring the dispute to an end. Sharon Doughty for Thames News.
Representing Britain's 22,500 ambulance workers are meeting now with health service managers to try to thrash out a settlement to the 6-month-long dispute. Hopes are high on both sides that a settlement may now at last be in sight. The mood is one of extreme optimism, said one union official before entering the meeting. Details have not emerged, but discussions are believed to centre on a new NHS offer of 15% spread over 2 years. But some ambulance workers are angry at reports that the deal involves giving up their original demand for a formula guaranteeing future pay rises. The two sides are meeting at the Whitley Council, the health service pay body, in London.
This was make-or-break day for the chief union negotiator, Roger Poole. After 6 months of limited industrial action, he believes a negotiated settlement may at last be in sight.
Everybody wants a settlement if we can get one, and it's necessary now for the unions and the employers to get together and find the best terms to bring about a settlement, if we can.
The chairman of the Whitley Council management side, David Rennie, was optimistic.
How would you rate the chances, Mr. Rennie?
Oh, better than evens.
But London shop stewards lobbying the meeting were worried the union might have given way on one of their key demands, a pay formula guaranteeing rises in future.
Don't believe what you've been reading in the press. Don't believe what you've been hearing on the radio. We're going in there, 2 issues, we're going in there to negotiate.
We've been in it for 25 weeks without money. We'll go another 25 weeks without money. We want a pay formula. We don't want this happening year after year after year. It's as simple as that.
The pay formula is of paramount importance. And any deal without a pay formula, I for one, and I'm sure the whole service in London is going to throw out.
Outside London, though, many ambulance crews are running out of money. They might now accept a straight cash settlement. A figure of between 15% and 16% over 2 years is thought most likely, more than the original 6.5% offer, but not by much.
Straight over now to Libby Wiener. Libby, what is happening now?
Well, at the moment, John, the two sides are still meeting separately. They should be getting together fairly soon, and it's understood that they should have worked out some sort of deal by about 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Well, what sort of deal is it that you expect to come out of this, Libby?
I think we're now looking at a 2-year deal. The figure that's been mentioned is between 15% and 16%, as I said, but I don't think it'll involve a pay formula. The management officials that I've spoken to have said that they're very happy with the new offer, and they've always said that they would never give way on that central issue of a pay formula.
Well, now, the all-important question, is it going to be accepted by the workforce?
I think if you look back at the beginning of this dispute, the ambulance crews were saying that what they wanted was parity with the police and the fire brigade. That's why the issue of the pay formula has been so important. Without it, I think a ballot would be very close indeed. But I think after all this time, if the union officials recommend the deal, it will be accepted.
So we really are looking at the final stages of this dispute?
I think we could be. It will take some time to get the ballot sent out, the papers sent out and back. But I think, yes, we could be in the final stages.
Any sort of time scale for all that to happen in?
About 3 weeks, they estimate it would take to ballot all the members. There are about 22,000 ambulance crews. It would take some time to get those papers back in, but we're looking towards sometime towards the middle of March when I expect that the ballot result will be made known.
Libby, thanks very much indeed.
Back to Sarah Barkley. Sarah, is there any latest news?
The talks have been going on now for more than 7 hours. Both sides have met together. We understand that they're now talking separately and they may get back together later on. So it looks as if the talks have been going on, will be going on for some time yet.
So the two sides are now talking separately. What's holding things up?
I don't think we should be alarmed by the fact that they've now gone back into separate rooms. They've been going through the deal line by line. There are clearly a lot of details that need to be looked through, and the unions, once they've met the management, need to have time to discuss those details on their own. So I don't think there's any cause for alarm.
You still sound reasonably optimistic. There is a chance then of a settlement.
Well, the word being used here is cautious optimism, and I think at this stage it's difficult to be more certain than that. The problem, as always, is the question of the pay formula. We understand that there will not be a pay formula included in the deal. The crucial test as to whether or not the package is acceptable will be the form of words or commitment that the health service managers use to look at the pay formula for the future.
But without that pay formula, how easy will it be for Roger Poole really to sell this to his men?
I think you'll find that opinion is divided up and down the country. We've talked to ambulance crews in London today who say that there is no prospect of them agreeing to a settlement unless there's a pay formula. The same, I think, is going to be true of Liverpool, where they're meeting tonight to decide whether or not to go on strike. So I think opinion will be very mixed around the country, depending on exactly what this deal says.
Sarah Barkley, thank you very much.
Was from one of the union negotiators who appeared from behind a curtain, leaving the waiting ambulance crews speculating anxiously on the package being hammered out behind closed doors. And then a non-committal shrug from George Verrill, one of the union representatives, and still we waited.
And in the last few minutes there have been developments in those ambulance talks. The pay offer, it seems, is rather larger than anybody had expected. Sarah Barkley is down at the talks now. Sarah, what are the details?
Michael, we've just been told, although I must stress it's not been officially confirmed, that what is being offered is a deal worth 21% over 2 years for some ambulance workers, but that those who've been taking industrial action are going to be penalised for taking action. That, we are told, is what the sticking point is.
21% is considerably larger than the 16 or so percent that people were talking about before. Do you think it'll be enough to persuade ambulance workers that an immediate pay formula for future pay rises isn't really necessary?
It is higher than was expected. There may be difficulties if they're going to penalise some of the ambulance workers who've been taking action. Ambulance crews as a whole may see that as a divisive move, but it's certainly a much higher offer, yes.
How much longer do you think these talks will go on?
We've been told in the last half hour that they're still hammering out the details. There is also talk of there being a pay formula introduced in 1991, next year. That would be a hopeful move, but again, that's yet to be officially confirmed.
So, do you think the settlement will finally be agreed later on tonight?
I think there's every sign of that. The fact that they've been talking for this long, they've been there for 10 hours now, does show that they mean business. It's the first time that talks have continued for this length of time. I think we'll have agreement tonight, but they may be going on for some time yet.
Sarah Barclay, thank you very much indeed.
23rd of February. In London, the two sides in the ambulance dispute have reached an agreement after more than 20 hours of talks. Duncan Nicol, National Health Service Chief Executive, has just outlined the deal. Pay rises of 17% over 2 years have been agreed, but management are continuing to rule out a pay formula to handle future claims.
First thing to say is we've got a deal. The deal is based on a 2-year package with no formula. If you look at the 2-year package, at the end of the period, that's in March 1991, there is a 17% increase over the 2-year period.
And this was the reaction of the chief union negotiator, Roger Poole.
A total increase at the end of the year of 17.6%. The improvement on pay is simply staggering. We have driven a coach and horses through the government's pay policy.
Our reporter Martin Frizzell has been at the talks throughout the night, and we now join him live at the Department of Health headquarters in London.
Lisa, it's been a very long night indeed, and it's just finished. Not too many minutes ago, as you said, Roger Poole and Duncan Nicol both gave separate press conferences at the end of what they hope is a 6-month dispute. They're both very keen that the ambulance workers should now accept their proposals. Not surprisingly, they both have different perspectives on what's on offer. The government says it's 17% over 2 years, and the unions claim that it is in fact 19.6%. And as Roger Poole, as you said, he believes he's driven a coach and horses through the government's pay policy. But if the government did give way on pay, they certainly didn't give way on the pay formula. Now that is something that many ambulance workers up and down the country were insistent that they have. They were demanding that they had to have this concrete mechanism that would prevent future strikes like this. Now, Duncan Nicol says there is no pay formula. Roger Poole says there is a framework, and this is the words he used, a framework mechanism which will be within the Whitley Council itself. It's not as concrete and as hard, fast as some ambulance workers, particularly those in Merseyside, would have liked, and it's now up to Roger Poole to go out and sell that. That's his job. He left here this morning just 5 minutes ago. He's now embarking on a very fast, very skillful, he hopes, public relations exercise to sell this deal to his members. The union is recommending the offer. It insists that they should take it. They hope that the damaging strikes will be over very soon, and it's going to a ballot of the members as soon as they can get the ballot papers printed.
Good evening. Ambulance crews all over the country are studying the deal agreed at dawn today between their unions and the National Health Service. It gives them a basic 17.5% increase over 2 years, but no formula to link future pay rises to wages outside the NHS. Both sides are claiming victory. The chief union negotiator calls it simply staggering. The health secretary says it's just a repackaging of the original offer. Now it's up to the crews. Over the next fortnight, they'll hold a nationwide ballot to decide if the deal is enough to end the longest public sector dispute since the miners' strike.
After 20 hours of grueling talks, Roger Poole, the man who's led the unions throughout the 6-month dispute, emerged determined to put a brave face on what was clearly not an overwhelming victory.
The improvement on pay is simply staggering. We have driven a coach and horses through the government's pay policy.
The deal he now has to sell to his members is based on last November's management offer of 9% over 18 months. That's been restructured, so it's paid as a lump sum plus 9%. The lump sum means ambulance staff who were suspended won't be penalised. A further 7.9% from October means ambulance pay ends up 17.6% higher after 2 years. More can be earned by local self-financing productivity deals that could add another 2%, making a total of 19.6%. On top of that, there's extra money for paramedics, the ambulance staff with special emergency medical training, who currently make up just 12% of the service. And for London staff like these at Kenton, there's the prospect of their London allowance being substantially increased in the future. But despite their insistence that they wouldn't give up without one, the unions were forced to abandon their demand for a pay formula, linking their wages to that of colleagues with equal experience in the fire service. And that's divided ambulance staff.
They're much better than before, aren't they?
They're much better, but there's no pay formula, and that's what it's all about.
An increase in London waiting, which might make a big difference.
We don't have pay formulas in the National Health Service. If we handed over our bargaining responsibilities to a formula, some automatic indexation, or to a third party, we would not be managing the health service. If we weren't managing the health service, we wouldn't be in control of the wage bill. That would threaten patient services. We can't do that.
The vaguely worded promise to take account of pay and career structures in future negotiations is a far cry from the firm commitment the unions were hoping for.
And actually, you see, if we'd had that agreement over the last 3 years, we'd have done better out of that than the firefighters' pay formula. So we're quite pleased with that. What we've got to do is to make sure that it sticks properly next year. It's a general election year, so I think we might have a chance in that year to make it stick, and make it stick for the future as well, and that's going to be good.
Shop stewards in Birmingham were among the first to discuss the offer formally. They decided to make no recommendation to their branches on whether or not to accept it.
Mr Poole will now have to wait for the result of similar meetings all over Britain before he can be sure he's managed to reach a settlement. Much now depends on whether crews begin drifting back to work. But if tonight's evidence that many are angry with the deal is widespread, the ballot result is likely to be close. And that'll leave many ambulance staff wondering if the sacrifices they made during this long and bitter dispute were worthwhile.
The pay deal is complicated. Some grades of ambulance workers will do better than others. But if they all get the 2% extra for productivity, this is how much better off they'll be. Before the present pay offer, ambulance men and women on the starting grade earned £7,340 a year. That'll have risen to £8,833 by the end of the 2-year period covered by the offer, equivalent to a 7% increase in annual income. Qualified staff on an annual wage of £10,093 last April will be earning almost £2,000 more by next year, an annual rise of 7%. Leading ambulance staff with full paramedic skills will see their pay go up from £10,888 to just over £13,000, up by 9% a year. Ambulance crews on Merseyside have already voted against that offer. At a mass meeting in Liverpool, they decided to go ahead with plans to start an all-out strike on Monday. Those crews were unhappy that the deal doesn't include a pay formula for the future.
They digested the national offer and then the motion was put to strike on Merseyside until the ballot result is known.
All those in favour of that proposal, please show. All those against?
250 in favour, just 5 votes against.
7 a.m. we are on total strike with provision of alternative ambulance services.
And as they left, there was bitter criticism of chief union negotiator Roger Poole.
Well, basically, people feel they've been sold down the river by Mr Poole. The offer is dressed up. It's really only 6.5% over 1 year when it's been analysed. And generally, it's the pay formula what was most important to us.
When he stood up in Trafalgar Square, he said we would never go back without a formula, a pay formula for our future, and that's exactly what he's asking us to do now.
It's just a total waste of time. It's all words, nothing more.
But a strike, I mean, you could be on your own with that.
No, we won't.
Merseyside's ambulance chief has called the strike irresponsible. Ambulance officers have been stretched already, he said, providing 999 cover. With not just the majority who are suspended, but all crews off the road, patients must suffer. But tonight, ambulance shop stewards on Merseyside are already planning for Monday's action. And they'll contact union officials all over the country to lobby for a big no vote in the ballot.
But outside Merseyside and London, other areas may give the union leadership the yes votes that they want. Mike Stewart has been to Bristol to gauge the reaction there to the deal.
Avon ambulance crews have been running more than a bare 999 service during the dispute. There have been no suspensions here, and local union representatives concede that the mood is much more moderate here than in many other parts of the country.
I think the difference in the action being taken locally and in other parts of the country is that chief ambulance officers and district health authorities have reacted differently. And that's why our members have not been locked out.
And with 2/3 of Avon's crews trained as paramedics, the service here will benefit from the pay offer's Special Skills Awards. Avon's the sort of authority the government wants to encourage. It's already split its 999 crews from a non-emergency service. And tonight, many of the staff here seem to be reluctantly in favour of the deal.
I think most of us would like to have seen a pay formula, but I think we're going to accept what's been offered.
What would you make of other crews elsewhere in the country who perhaps won't?
Well, there's obviously crews, unlike Avon, that have been unpaid for a long time, and I think they might sort of be digging their heels in a little bit more.
I'm happy with the pay rise, more than happy, yes, it's a very good offer. But I think without the pay formula, April the 1st next year, we'll be in the same boat again.
Personally, I think it's come to an end now and both sides have got a compromise, and I think it's a fair deal.
So Avon's ambulance staff seem likely to settle, although many concede that perhaps the dispute hasn't touched them as harshly as others elsewhere.
Over the last 6 months, the dispute has grown into a fierce battle of wills between ambulance workers on one side and the NHS management, backed up by the Health Secretary, on the other. The pay settlement may produce a return to work, but the long-term effects of the dispute and the way it's been resolved will be far-reaching.
There's rarely been a dispute that commanded such overwhelming public support, collected by the bucket. But public support was not enough in the face of the government's iron determination not to give way. In the end, the pressure to settle fell heavily on the unions, their members riven by deepening divisions. Some pressed for all-out strikes, others for local deals, and many, still paid, had taken virtually no action. That divided membership will now decide in a ballot. Mild in manner, Roger Poole won the propaganda war by sending out his crews to work unpaid, and the public blamed the government. He trod a fine tactical line, causing maximum disruption while not quite calling a strike, always saying his crews would be there for emergencies. Only this morning that approach was still on display. We were just about to interview an unpaid, suspended shop steward when there was news of an accident outside.
Well, can you unwire me? I can't go unwired up.
He ran out to tend a seriously injured woman run over outside the Whitley Council talks. But over the bitter months, Roger Poole may have raised expectations impossible to deliver. Yesterday, Labour politicians were calling for a pay formula. But today, they're joining Roger Poole in persuading crews to go back to work.
I hope that if the ballot is not going to take place until March, that there will be an immediate resumption of work. We desperately need to get the ambulance service back on the road. What we've seen in the recent months is that without the ambulance service, we have got people left very seriously at risk.
If Kenneth Clark thinks he's emerged the victor, giving little ground in the deal, he's won few laurels. Coming hard on the heels of his war with the doctors, it's done little to help his public image. Defending an unpopular cause, he insisted ambulance workers shouldn't set the pace for galloping pay increases in the rest of the NHS.
The fact that the public was supporting them and liked ambulancemen didn't relieve the people responsible for the health service of making sure we spent the taxpayers' money sensibly. And spending it sensibly means spending it on fair settlements for each group of staff, and also spending a lot of that money on improving the patient services. That's my overriding responsibility, and I like people to judge me by the extent to which I discharge that.
But salvaging the tattered remnants of a demoralised service will be hard for the managers, and today's settlement, though not high, will bring financial problems for health authorities. They'll have to pay the £20 million cost of hiring the army and police, and they've only been given an unrealistic 5% to cover pay rises that'll plainly be...
Lives are being put at risk by the all-out strike that started there this morning. Some crews in North London have also taken strike action. They're protesting at the pay offer, which union leaders are urging them to vote in favour of.
The Merseyside crews decided to go on indefinite strike because last week's agreement did not include a long-term pay formula. They're trying to maintain an emergency service using ambulances hired from local councils. and have issued a special phone number to doctors, hospitals and the police. But their action was condemned by management after a critically ill baby had to be taken to hospital in a police ambulance. The striking crews were accused of putting lives at risk.
We're dealing with every 999 call, which is a call for help for people who are seriously injured or in a life and death situation. And I really fear that this sort of action can only increase the risks to people's lives.
But some other ambulance workers have also decided not to wait for the union ballot to express their unhappiness with the pay deal. At Kenton in northwest London, most of the crews walked out tonight to begin their own indefinite strike. They say the deal they're being asked to accept is no better than the one offered months ago.
This pay deal equates to 13%, not the 17% that has been put out by the media. It's 13%. Over 2 years, that is 6.5%, which is the original offer, and that is totally unacceptable.
Ballot papers are being sent out to the 22,000 ambulance workers involved in the dispute, along with letters from union leaders urging them to accept the pay deal. But crews in Oxfordshire decided today to vote no, describing the offer as miserable. The result of the ballot is...
Ambulance Union's Roger Poole was heckled by angry crews today when he arrived for talks on the pay deal agreed last Friday. For the first time, Mr. Poole admitted that the absence of a long-term pay formula was a serious problem in getting staff to accept the offer.
Union leader Roger Poole admitted today that his hard-won deal was running into trouble.
I think that the lack of a pay formula has been a real problem in the offer that we've got. I think the government are going to have to come to terms with that.
Just how much of a problem became clear as he was taunted by suspended London crews.
In terms of money, it's much better than what we had on the table. But look, that is not...
No, he's better off on 9 1/4 over a year and a half, Roger.
Listen, you can work the figures out, whichever way you want to work the figures out.
It's 6.5%.
It is much, much better than 6.5%.
No, it's 6.5%.
But the crews here weren't convinced. London has taken the hardest line, but regional officials also appear worried.
I'm sure that will be a disappointment to all the ambulance staff.
And therefore might it be rejected?
I think we'll see that after the ballot.
Very mixed reaction. I'm here to learn more about it.
A lot of the members do want a pay formula linking them. That's something we'll have to discuss today and look at.
Tonight, as the ballot papers were being printed, the outcome was by no means as certain as the unions had hoped. By claiming that the 17% deal was staggering, they appear to have made it that much harder to sell to their members. Libby Vina, ITN, Central London.
Habitat has announced...
We feel sold out is the Judas.
The disgruntled crews lobbied the national officers who joined Mr. Poole for a meeting to review the complicated pay package.
Bye, Donna, thanks for speaking to us.
I think that Mr. Poole was doing very well until he tried to present this as victory. I don't think it's a victory, but I don't think it's probably quite as bad as some of these people may feel either.
Members are being balloted on the offer, the results expected on March the 13th. But while crews in North London favour more industrial action, south of the river others want peace. This station, Barnhurst in Kent, has voted to resume normal working on Thursday ahead of the ballot.
We're going to give the public the service back that they've been doing without. We feel the public have been absolutely tremendous with their support and money in the bucket, and we now realise that the dispute is over. We want to get back to work to give the public effectively their service back.
The ballot now seems likely to produce a serious split in London.
On the one hand, some crews have walked out instantly. Other crews have said they're going back to work. Other crews are perhaps threatened to leave the ambulance service. And I would really just call for a bit of calm and for people to rationally look at the proposals that are coming through the doors tomorrow and the day after.
Last Friday, Roger Poole said he had a deal. Now his most difficult negotiating challenge is not with management, but his membership. This is Teresa Driscoll for Thames News.
Stewards representing ambulance crews in London are demanding that management withdraw a letter setting out terms for a return to work. Ambulance staff are furious that they would have to accept new rotas, which they say would involve working more unsocial hours. They're warning that the letter could jeopardise a return to work.
The mood at today's meeting of the London ambulance shop stewards was described as both angry and bitter. They overwhelmingly rejected a letter delivered to their members last Friday, insisting on new working rotas as a condition for a return to work. Although parts of northeast London are already operating the new working conditions designed to provide more night cover, Shop stewards say any further negotiations must take place when they return to work, not before.
I hope the letter will be withdrawn because it's caused a lot of anger throughout ambulance men all over London. But what will happen if it's not withdrawn is that we will reconvene all the stewards again in London next Wednesday. In the meantime, they'll go back to their ambulance stations, consult with their members, and then they'll bring their members' views back to the meeting next Wednesday in London.
You've got to recognise that we have been negotiating these rotas with our conveners for almost 18 months. Prior to the dispute, we were on the point of introducing those rotas, and they do provide an improved accident and emergency cover for London.
To add to management's troubles, today they confirmed that an unofficial agreement had been made between themselves and the unions that those ambulance staff who don't return to work on the agreed day will forfeit the lump sums negotiated in the final pay settlement. It's bound to further anger those London members who now not only face new rotas, but also deals done behind their backs.
Workers' national ballot, and the first signs are that last month's pay offer will be overwhelmingly accepted. The deal agreed between their unions and the health service management would give crews a 17.6% rise, phased in over 2 years. The result will be known tomorrow.
Ballot papers were still being delivered to the Electoral Reform Society in London this morning for counting. While many ambulance staff are unhappy with the deal agreed 2 weeks ago between union leaders and health service managers, early indications suggest it will be accepted by a majority of workers. In Scotland, the main union there has already announced the result of its ballot, an overwhelming 78% majority in favour of the deal. Elsewhere, a straw poll of union officials in 20 areas contacted by the BBC this morning revealed that the deal could be rejected in just 3 regions, including Merseyside, where crews are on strike. In London, where 16 stations are on strike, the vote may be split. But in the other areas, some of which are already working normally, the signs are that the deal will be accepted. But there's disappointment at the lack of a pay formula.
The formula is not going to go away, I've got to tell you that. That's something that will be there. We'll be talking about it every year when negotiations come up.
If the deal is accepted, as union leaders predict it will be, they'll announce an official return-to-work date, probably the end of this week, signalling the formal end to one of the longest industrial disputes for 10 years.
Pay offer. Good morning. The news from TVAM on Tuesday, the 13th of March. Whose pay ballot should be known today, and early returns suggest a majority will accept the deal and return to work, as Kay Oliver now reports.
The national result will be announced this afternoon by Chief Union Negotiator Roger Poole. If it gives the overwhelming support the union predicts, it's likely he'll then call for an orderly return to work by ambulance staff later this week. The first result in the ballot has come from the Transport Union in Scotland, where crews have voted 4-1 in favour of the 2-year pay deal, said by the unions to be worth 17.6%. But the failure to secure a pay formula is likely to ensure that in some militant areas, the return to work will not be smooth.
If we'd had the pay formula, we probably would have settled for a bit less in money terms, and we could have got it back at a later date.
Meanwhile, the Moderate Association of Professional Ambulance Personnel has voted in favour of the offer in a 71% turnout.
Festival to mark the summer solstice.
We've just heard that ambulance crews have voted to accept the government's 2-year pay deal. 81% were in favour. It's expected that normal working will resume on Friday. The dispute has lasted 6 months.
When Roger Poole emerged from talks with health service chiefs last month with a pay rise worth an average 17.6%, some ambulance workers accused him of selling them out. But at TUC headquarters this afternoon, he had the satisfaction of announcing that an overwhelming majority of his union members had voted to accept that deal. Now the ambulance workers will be ordered to call off all industrial action, and the army ambulances will soon disappear from Britain's streets. The government announced today that the cost of using army crews had been at least £3.5 million.
Hello and a very good evening. The ambulance dispute is over. After nearly 6 months of grueling industrial action, crews have voted to return to work. They've accepted a 2-year deal said to be worth 17%. They go back on Friday. The news has been welcomed by politicians from all parties. The Health Secretary, Kenneth Clarke, described the agreement as a good one for staff and patients alike. The Liberal Democrat health spokesman, Charles Kennedy, says all future disputes should automatically be referred to arbitration. The Conservative MP, Jerry Hayes, called the deal a victory for common sense and peace with honour for both sides. And in a few moments, we'll be talking live in the studio to Roger Poole, the chief union negotiator who thrashed out the deal.
But first tonight, we've a series of special reports. We ask crews if it was worth holding out for so long, and we'll look at the cost to the public in human terms. And what of the future? Are the prospects for the ambulance service any brighter? More than 80% of ambulance crews voted in favour of the two-year deal, even though it doesn't guarantee future pay rises. Sharon Doughty has been looking at how staff voted and exactly what the package will mean.
To maintain the
Chief Union negotiator Roger Poole was triumphant this afternoon as he announced the ballot results. With 81% of ambulance crews in favour of the two-year deal, he said they'd made their feelings very clear.
Because all our members had in front of them when they started was 6.5%. They have substantially more than 6.5% in front of them now, and that is why they have voted so overwhelmingly to accept the offer.
He admitted there was disappointment over the lack of a pay formula, but said it was impossible to negotiate. He refused to accept accusations from London crews that the two-year settlement was a sellout. The deal will give qualified ambulance staff an extra £2,268 over 2 years. That will considerably improve their annual salary of £10,093. Then there'll be a bonus of up to £500 for paramedic skills and an extra 2% negotiable locally for productivity. In London, there'll also be an increase in London waiting.
Well, I'm very pleased that the staff have voted in such substantial numbers to back the offer that we originally offered. I mean, it is a sensible offer, it's a fair one, it's a good one for patients as well as for staff.
Although 1 in 5 ambulance staff voted against this pay deal, they say they will be back on shift on Friday. An added incentive from the government is a payment of £850 to cover the dispute period, which they say emergency crews will lose if they don't return to work. Sharon Doughty at Congress House for Thames News.
There has been a mixed reaction from crews to the deal. Some believe they've been sold out. Others are happy with the result. We're at 2 stations, one in North London, the other south of the river. Ken Andrew has this report.
Camden Ambulance Station has been one of the most militant throughout this dispute, but during the dispute they've continued with this sort of maintenance and cleaning work. Now, Eric Roberts, with 81% of the members voting for the offer, has the strike been a washout as well?
No. We've been out for 6 months, we've had 100% support from the public. Unfortunately, 81% of our members have, in my opinion, accepted a bad deal. Not one of them have accepted a good deal.
OK, it's been accepted by 81%. Will everyone in London go back to work immediately?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. There's a stewards meeting in the morning. London will have to sit back and assess what has happened and respond to that. If it's time to say to call it a day and to hang our boots up, we will do it.
What happens to the union from here, its future?
Its future's good. As I say, we fought a good fight, and the struggle goes on. It doesn't end here.
And your view of its leader, Roger Poole?
My view of Roger Poole hasn't changed. His policies I actually did not like. The tactics that he used in the dispute, in my opinion, and in many others, were wrong. It was too passive. We should have attacked Thatcher.
A sellout at the end?
No, I don't think it was a sellout. He got the best deal he could when he went into that room because he ran the dispute wrong and he went in weak. If he'd have ran it properly, if he'd have been positive from the beginning, with the public backing, we would have been strong going into that room and we would have come out with 11.4 and a pay formula, what we've been out for 6 months for.
So the mood here at Camden can be summed up in 2 words: discontentment and disappointment.
Well, here south of the river in Deptford, the mood throughout the dispute has been determined, but more moderate than North London. I'm joined now by 2 of the representatives. First of all, John Cannon, can I ask you, how would you describe the reaction to today's developments?
We're quite pleased it's all over, but at the same time disappointed because we never got the most important thing after such a long fight for it, really.
You're talking, of course, about the pay formula. How's morale?
Oh, morale is brilliant. I mean, morale is better now than it was before the dispute started. It's actually got everybody together and happy together.
If I can turn to your colleague Roy Farmer, how do you feel about the way things have ended?
Mixed feelings, really. I'm glad the dispute is over. I'm sad that we didn't achieve all that we set out to achieve. Resentful that some people have made gains at the expense of the ambulance people and their families. And I can only apologise to the public. They've been wonderful, and I'm sorry that they suffered at the hands of the inexperienced.
In short, was it worth it?
I'll keep that in reservation, I think.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Clearly a somewhat reluctant return to work. Now back to the studio.
Thank you, Teresa. The 6-month dispute has left a legacy of bitterness and human misery. Some people died as a direct result. The army was stretched to the limit trying to provide emergency cover, and the ambulance service of the future faces the battle of restoring morale. We've got 3 reports. First, this from Githa Hutton, who's been looking at the cost to human life.
The death of 86-year-old Thomas Hunt has highlighted the terrible human cost of the ambulance dispute. The pensioner had to wait 7.5 hours for an ambulance to take him to hospital after he fell 10 feet down these stairs at his home in New Eltham last November. He suffered a broken hip, pelvis and ribs. He was eventually taken to hospital, but there were more delays that end, as a yellow alert was an operation. He died 48 hours after the accident. Today, his widow spoke about her anger and bitterness. She lays the blame for her husband's death squarely on the shoulders of the government.
Nobody deserves to die like he did. It's just all wrong, isn't it? I think it's wicked, and he was a man never asked the NHS for a penny.
While the Hunt story is one of the most tragic to come out of the dispute, there have been thousands of other people who have been affected. The outpatients. Ever since the dispute started, Ernie and Linda Harris from Addiscombe near Croydon have been forced to cancel appointments or rely on friends and taxis to get them to hospital. But 84-year-old Mr. Harris doesn't blame the striking ambulanceman for the problems he's had to face.
The ambulancemen are really in a class of their own, and I wish them all the luck in the future. I'm very sorry they didn't get quite what they wanted, and I think they had a very good leader in Mr. Paul.
Hospitals have also been at the sharp end. Here at Charing Cross, staff have had to organise private taxis. Even porters have helped bring patients in for treatment. While most clinics here have managed to continue, it's the physiotherapy department which has been hardest hit. Although the dispute's now over, it's likely to be some time before things will get back to normal. Githa Hutton, Thames News.
When the military ambulances rolled out of Chelsea Barracks on a wet November night, few people imagined they'd still be on active duty today. There was apprehension among the service personnel. They'd been trained in first aid for the battlefield, not on the streets of London. This morning, those same crews were preparing to go back to normal army life, wiser and even more experienced.
You've seen a car overturn, you dive out your ambulance, you think, Jesus Christ, what do I do here? And
the thing is, we've actually proved that we can do it. At the beginning, we were told we couldn't do it, but now we've actually proved that we can.
The most disturbing was going to a cot death. I think that's probably the worst cot I've been to.
And how did that affect you?
Sleepless nights, a couple of sleepless nights, but you put it behind you. You've got to.
In the ops room, they've kept a tally of the calls they've answered, just under 60,000. 70% of them have been routine movements of old people, but they've also delivered more than a dozen babies. On the downside, 2 of their ambulances have been involved in fatal collisions. Despite frequent accusations that lives were lost because of the dispute, the Army insists no one died through their lack of care.
The low points are very clear. It is hearing what other people's problems have been. The high points, seeing the successes and hearing the stories of success from medics who have saved a life and arrived at hospital to hand over to a casualty surgeon, and the surgeon has turned around and said, well done, you've done it right.
Throughout this dispute, the services have always maintained that they've just been doing their job, but they have been heartened by a number of telephone calls and letters they've received thanking them for doing that job. For instance, one here from a NUPE official paying tribute to his army equivalent. Another one from an elderly woman who lost her husband. She says the ambulance was here within 10 minutes, and although my husband had already died, they did all they could and were so very kind to me.
Plans are already in action to rebuild the London ambulance service, but both crews and managers agree it will never be the same again. After months of little or no management control, officers still don't know exactly how many staff will return to work. It's estimated there could be around 400 vacancies to fill.
Right, so it's on Harrow Road, junction with which avenue?
This is the new computerised control at ambulance headquarters, the first sign of changes to come. Yet this is where most bitterness is likely to be targeted. 34 controllers walked out during the dispute, the rest continued to work.
We've got to assimilate staff back into our room, staff that walked out because of their conscience or whatever. We've got staff in here who are equally conscious of the fact of their responsibilities to London's public. We've now got to gel those two people together.
Within the next 2 years, London's 32 district health authorities are likely to have control of non-emergency budgets. This will mean privatisation and the London Ambulance Service bidding against private ambulance companies like these for contracts. Meanwhile, paramedic training for the emergency service is on the increase. It's hoped emergency crews will all eventually have paramedic training.
There's no doubt that we need to move forward with all the other ambulance services in the country, and we need to provide a better standard of immediate care for patients. And hopefully that's what we will now be able to achieve.
Soon the London Ambulance Service will be run by a new general manager. Acting Chief Officer Tom Crosby will retire in a year. He says he knows staff are bitter, but prospects are good.
I think the terms of their settlement is very good. They've got the possibility of being recognised as paramedics. They've got the possibility to train as paramedics, and I think that, coupled with hard work by the officers and by the staff side themselves, we will soon be able to put this dispute behind us and concentrate on giving London the ambulance service that they deserve.
And with me now is Roger Poole, the union leader who negotiated the peace plan. Roger Poole, a central issue of this long dispute, as you know, was a formula which pegged ambulance pay to other emergency services, an issue for which your members, like those we saw at Deptford a short while ago, have suffered 6 months of hardship. But you have failed to deliver that formula.
Yes, I think that's a great disappointment to everybody, isn't it? The government should have offered us the firefighters' pay formula, but they refused to do so. In the negotiations, they offered us substantially extra money over and above that which they'd offered us before. And we had to be honest with our members and say to them that we'd achieved the maximum that we believed we were going to achieve by negotiation. And as a result, our members have voted by over 80% to accept the deal. I think it's a good deal on money. What we've now got to do is...
Britain's ambulance workers have gone back to normal working, which brings their 6-month pay dispute officially to a close. Many crews hadn't waited and had ended their industrial action after the pay deal was struck. From today, the 999 services are fully operational again.
7 o'clock this morning, and after 6 months of industrial action, ambulance crews arrived for work at Deptford Ambulance Station in London. Roger Poole, the man who's led the unions throughout the dispute, was there to meet them and to pay a final tribute to the public for their support.
The public have been magnificent, haven't they, throughout this dispute. They've continued to put money into our people's buckets in order to sustain them. They've signed their petitions. They've told them to keep going because they knew the government was wrong about that 6.5% pay offer.
By mid-morning, the London Ambulance Service control room, refurbished during the dispute, was reporting a full turnout from the capital's 71 stations. No calls were handed to Scotland Yard to be answered by the police or military. The army started pulling out yesterday afternoon. The official cost of their services during the dispute, £5 million. At St Thomas's Hospital, an unfamiliar but welcome sight. These crews were doing their first official shift for more than 4 months.
It's nice to be back at work, for us to now know that we can look after the members of the British public properly.
It's the public who'll be most relieved to see the ambulance service back to normal. Throughout the dispute, doctors voiced their concerns about the effects on patients. This morning, they're relieved to see ambulances. Rather, the dispute reached its formal end. The issue which led to crews being suspended in London came back to haunt them. Crews had refused to use this button to tell control they were ready for the next job. They said it led to long delays. Managers disagreed.